The morning my council told me to step down, snow was falling on an empty territory. I stood at the window of Snowfall Keep and watched the northern grounds, 300 miles of pine and frozen river that had once been alive with wolves, and felt the quiet the way you feel a missing tooth with your tongue. Constantly, without meaning to. 7 years of it, and the ache had not dulled. The land will not answer a king without a true bond, Councillor Drav said behind me. He was careful with his words, always had been, but careful words still cut. The elders are meeting again at the winter solstice. They will ask, as they asked last year, whether Valdenmark should begin succession proceedings. I did not turn from the window. Tell them what I told them last year. My king, you told them to wait. Then tell them to keep waiting. He left without another word. They always did, eventually. 7 years of waiting had made me very good at the silence that follows a refusal and very bad at everything else. My wolf, the great pale creature that had once been my constant inner compass, restless and alert in my chest, had gone still the same winter the northern wolves left. Not dead. Just absent in the way a fire goes absent when the last coal stops glowing. Present enough to remind me what warmth had felt like. Not present enough to give any. I had not taken another mate. My council thought it was grief. My first bond had ended not in death but in dissolution, a rare and devastating thing, the kind that leaves both parties technically alive and wholly unmade. They were wrong. It was not grief that kept me from it. It was the certainty, quiet and unreasonable, that the bond I was supposed to have was still out there, unmet, and that choosing another would be choosing to stop looking. 7 years is a long time to hold that kind of certainty. Long enough that even I had begun to wonder if it was faith or simply stubbornness wearing faith's clothing. The report came 3 days later, carried by a border rider whose horse was still sweating when he reached my hall. An unregistered woman had been seen in the Northern Territory, moving on foot through the abandoned wolf grounds near the Iravel Ridge. Alone. No pack markings, no registered bloodline, no name in any of the border logs. She had been spotted at dawn by one of my patrol riders who had approached her and then stopped, because she was not alone. She had 7 wolves around her. Not following at a distance, around her, close enough to touch. My patrol rider, a seasoned man who had held the northern border for 12 years, wrote in his log that he had not approached further because the wolves had positioned themselves in a way that made it clear, without aggression, without sound, that she was not to be disturbed. He wrote they were not protecting her from threat, they were simply with her, the way wolves are with their own. I read the report twice, then I called for my horse. Drav tried to send a regiment with me. I took 2 riders and told him I would return within the week. He stood in the courtyard with the expression he always wore when I made decisions he considered unwise, which was often, and said nothing, because he had learned that saying something only made me leave faster. The Northern Territory in deep winter is a particular kind of beautiful, the kind that does not care whether you find it so. The pines were heavy with snow, the rivers locked beneath ice so clear you could see the stones at the bottom, the sky the specific gray of old iron. I had ridden these grounds since I was a boy. My father had brought me here to show me the wolves when I was 7 years old, and I could still remember the feeling of standing in the cold with the pack moving around us, my father's hand on my shoulder, the certainty that settled in my chest like a stone dropping into still water. This is real. This is what the kingdom is for. For 7 years I had ridden these same grounds and seen nothing, heard nothing. The absence was a physical thing, like trying to breathe in a room from which all the air has been slowly, steadily removed. On the second morning we found tracks. Not just wolf tracks, though there were those too, more than I had seen in 7 years, fresh and overlapping, moving in a direction with purpose. There were boot prints alongside them, small, unhurried. The stride of someone who was not lost and was not rushing, someone who walked as though the frozen ground belonged to her and she was simply passing through. I told my riders to stay back and followed the tracks alone. I found her at the edge of a frozen clearing just past the Iravel Ridge in the pale mid-morning light. She was sitting on a fallen pine, her coat dark against the snow, her hands loose in her lap. There were 11 wolves around her, not 7, 11. They had come while no one was watching, drawn by something I could not name, and they were settled around her in the particular way of wolves who are not on alert, not hunting, not waiting for anything. They were simply there, at rest. In the way that a fire is at rest, not inactive, simply where it belongs. She was looking at me when I cleared the tree line. She had heard me coming or known I was there before I arrived, I could not tell which. Her eyes were steady. She did not stand. She did not, I noticed, look at the wolves as though she expected them to do anything on her behalf. She simply looked at me and waited. I stopped at the edge of the clearing. The wolves noted me. One of the larger males lifted his head, assessed me for a moment, and then, with the specific lack of urgency that was somehow more disconcerting than aggression, lowered it again. Dismissed me, as though I were a thing that required no particular response. In my own northern territory, with my own wolves or what had been my wolves 7 years ago. I felt something move in my chest. Not my wolf, not yet, but something adjacent to it, an awareness, a shift in the air's weight, the way a compass needle moves when north is suddenly, finally close. "You are on Valdenmark land," I said. It was not the most graceful opening I had ever managed. She did not appear to find it particularly impressive either. "I know," she said. Her voice was quiet and unhurried, the same quality as her footprints. "Your border rider told me 2 mornings ago. He told me you had 7 wolves with you." She glanced at the animals around her with a mild expression as though counting. 11 now," she said. "They keep finding us." "Us?" She said it simply, without performance, the way you speak of people you travel with. "Who are you?" I asked. She was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, considering, the way someone considers a question they have been asked before and have never found a fully satisfying answer to. "Sen," she said. "I don't have a pack name to give you. I haven't had one for a long time." "Where do you come from?" "East of the Havard River originally. I've been moving for," she paused, "some years." "Moving toward what?" She looked at me for a moment with an expression I would spend a long time afterward trying to name. It was not evasion. It was not calculation. It was the expression of someone who has been walking toward something for so long that they have stopped trying to describe the destination and have learned instead to simply trust the direction. "I don't know yet," she said. "But the wolves seem to." One of the wolves, a young female near Sen's left knee, turned and looked at me then. It held my gaze for a moment, calm and measuring, and I felt the hair on the back of my neck rise in a way it had not risen in 7 years. Not from threat, from recognition, from the feeling of being seen by something very old and very certain. I had grown up with wolves. I knew the difference between a pack at ease and a pack at rest. What I was looking at was neither. It was a pack that had arrived somewhere, that had, after a long journey, found the place it was going. The place was Sen. I stood at the edge of that clearing for a long time, and I was honest enough with myself, riding back to my men in the cold afternoon, to name what I had felt. The compass needle in my chest had moved. 7 years of stillness, and it had moved. I told my riders we would make camp and stay 1 more night. She did not try to avoid me. That in itself was its own kind of telling. I had known people who were guilty of something: trespass, fraud, territorial ambition, and they had a particular quality of watchfulness, a calculation behind their ease. Sen had none of it. When I returned to the clearing that afternoon and sat on the opposite end of the fallen pine, she moved over to give me room without comment, and the wolves resettled without alarm, and that was that. We talked for a long time in the low winter light. Not about the bond or the territory or the 7 years of absence. I did not know yet how to begin on any of those things, and she did not ask me to. We talked about the territory itself. She knew it, I realized, with an intimacy that startled me. Not the way a scout knows ground, routes, and landmarks and strategic features. The way a person knows a place they love. She knew where the ice on the Iraval River was thinnest and why. She knew which pines the wolves used as shelter markers in deep winter. She knew the specific hour at which the light changed on the ridge, and what the pack used it for, and how the young wolves learned to read it. "How long have you been here?" I asked at some point. "In the Northern Territory, since the first snow," she considered. "Perhaps 6 weeks." 6 weeks. She had been in my empty northern grounds for 6 weeks, and in that time 11 wolves had found her, and my border patrol had not reported her until 3 days ago, and the track she had left in the snow was as unhurried and unfrightened as a woman walking in her own garden. "You weren't afraid," I said. It was not quite a question. She looked at the wolves around us. "Of them? No." A pause. "Of the cold, a little the first week. I hadn't expected it to be this particular kind of cold." "What kind?" "The kind that's also very quiet," she said. "I'd been in cold places before, but not quiet ones." She was still for a moment. "I liked it after a while." My wolf moved in my chest then. The smallest possible thing, the shift of a sleeping creature adjusting its position, not waking, simply acknowledging that something nearby warranted acknowledgement. I had not felt it in so long that the sensation was almost disorienting. I looked at the trees and said nothing, and hoped it did not show on my face. It almost certainly showed on my face. "Why does your king come himself to find an unregistered wanderer?" Sen asked. Not challenging, genuinely curious. I looked at her. She was watching me with those steady eyes, the same quality of attention she turned on everything, patient, present, not pushing. "The report mentioned the wolves," I said. "Ah," she nodded, as though that explained it entirely. "They've been gone a long time, haven't they?" Not a question. She said it the way someone says something they have understood from the landscape around them, from the emptiness of the territory, the absence of pack markers, the particular silence of grounds that should have been loud with life. 7 years, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said carefully, as though she did not want to overstep, "They weren't gone. They were waiting." "For what?" She looked at me and then looked away, at the wolves settled around us in the cold afternoon light. She did not answer. I thought perhaps she did not know or did not want to say. Later, I would understand that she had simply known that the answer was not yet hers to give. That night I lay in my camp and listened to the Northern Territory, and for the first time in 7 years it was not silent. Somewhere past the tree line, wolves were moving, not restlessly, not hunting, moving the way a household moves when it is settling in for the night, purposefully, quietly, as though they belonged. I did not sleep. On the 3rd morning, I asked her to come to Valdenmark. I did not command it. I want to be precise about that, not for the sake of how it sounds, but because the distinction mattered to me then and matters to me still. I asked. I told her who I was, which I suspected she already knew, and I told her that I wanted to understand what was happening in the Northern Territory, and that I believed her presence was at the center of it. I told her she would be housed well, that no one would make demands on her, and that she was free to refuse. She looked at me for a long time. "The wolves," she said, "can they come?" I looked at the 11 wolves, who were looking back at me with the collective patience of animals who had already decided how this was going to go. "They're Valdenmark wolves," I said. "They were always welcome." She nodded as though that settled it. "Then yes," she said, "I'll come." We left the next morning. Sen on a horse I'd brought from camp. She rode as she walked, quietly, without fuss, and 11 wolves ranging ahead and behind us through the pines. My 2 riders said nothing, which was commendable, because I could see from the set of their shoulders that they had a great number of things they wanted to say. By the time we reached the southern edge of the Northern Territory, there were 16 wolves. I did not mention this. I rode beside Sen and watched the wolves move through the snow around us, and felt the compass in my chest pulling steadily, certainly, in a direction I had not dared to name. Snowfall Keep was not prepared for her arrival. To be fair, I had not warned them. Drav met us in the outer yard with the expression of a man who has prepared himself for bad news and has received something he has no category for. He looked at Sen. He looked at the 16 wolves spreading through the outer yard with the calm entitlement of creatures who had come home. He looked back at me. "My king," he said. "Counselor Drav," I said. "This is Sen. She'll need quarters in the East Wing. The wolves are to be permitted anywhere on the grounds they choose." "The wolves," he said carefully, "are to be permitted anywhere." "Anywhere they choose," I said. "Yes." I took him aside privately afterward and told him only what I thought he needed to know, that Sen was an unregistered wanderer I had found in the Northern Territory, that she had been traveling with the pack, and that I wanted her comfortable and untroubled. I did not tell him about the compass in my chest. I did not tell him that my wolf had stirred for the first time in 7 years. I was not yet ready to say those things aloud, partly because saying them aloud would mean making them real, and I was still, at that point, holding the possibility that I was wrong, that this was coincidence or wishful reading of a lonely wolf territory, that I was a king who had been waiting too long for something and had finally found a shape to pour the waiting into. I was not wrong. I knew I was not wrong. I simply needed a few more days to accept it. Those days had their own particular quality. I had never been a man who watched people. I had always been a man who acted, who decided, who moved through the world with the directness my father had called one of my better qualities, and my counsel called one of my more exhausting ones. I did not, as a rule, stand at windows and observe. I stood at a great many windows in those days. She moved through Snowfall Keep the way she moved through the Northern Territory, unhurried, unperforming, as though the space she was in had nothing to prove to her and she had nothing to prove to it. The Keep staff, who were proud people with clear hierarchies and a deep collective suspicion of anything unregistered and unclassified, found her, I think, completely baffling. She thanked the kitchen woman by name on the second day. She had asked the woman's name on the first, and the kitchen woman came to me afterward in a state I can only describe as pleasantly destabilized, to ask whether the unregistered wanderer in the East Wing was perhaps of some bloodline they should know about. "She's simply polite," I told her. "She's not simply anything, my king," the kitchen woman said and went back to the kitchen. The wolves settled in the outer grounds and the great hall with an authority that left my household staff speechless. They did not threaten. They did not demand. They simply occupied space the way the territory's own wolves had once occupied it, as a fact, a rightness, a living signature that the land was well. 3 of the older wolves took positions near Sen's East Wing chambers without being asked. 2 of the youngest, barely more than pups, began following my keeper of the grounds on his morning rounds with an earnestness that made the old man look as though he was trying very hard not to be moved. My wolf in my chest was no longer still. It had not risen, not fully, but it was awake, alert, turning its attention the way a creature turns its attention when it has found the scent it has been looking for, and is taking a moment simply to be certain. On the 4th evening, I went to find her. She was in the great hall, by the east fireplace, the one the Keep's previous Luna had favored. She was not doing anything in particular, sitting in one of the broad chairs, her feet tucked beneath her, watching the fire. 2 wolves lay on either side of the chair. One of the young ones was half in her lap, in the graceless way of young wolves who have not yet learned that they are large, and she had one hand resting on it with an ease that suggested she had long since stopped noticing. I sat down in the chair across the fire from her. "How are the quarters?" I asked. "Warm," she said. "Very warm. I'd forgotten about warm." You'd been out there 6 weeks. She looked at the fire. I didn't mind, the cold was honest. And warmth isn't. She turned to look at me then, with a hint of something that might have been amusement. Warmth is available, she said. The cold doesn't pretend to be what it isn't. I studied her for a moment. You've been moving a long time, I said, east of the Havard, some years. Yes. What were you moving away from? The question was direct. I had not meant it to be anything else. She did not seem to mind directness. She met it with the same steady quality she brought to everything, and considered it honestly. A pack that dissolved, she said after a moment. My father's pack. He died and the bonds broke and people went different directions. A pause. I didn't have anywhere particular to go, so I went north, and then I went further north, and then I found I didn't want to stop, so I kept going. For years, she agreed. What changed 6 weeks ago? I asked. When you entered the Northern Territory. She was quiet for a moment. In the firelight, her face had a quality I could not quite account for, not beautiful in any conventional arrangement, but arresting in the way that things of particular integrity are arresting. You look at them and feel the quality of their reality. I stopped, she said simply. I've been walking for a long time and I came to the Iraval Ridge and I looked out over the territory and I stopped. Something said here, not in words, just here. She turned her palm over in her lap, a small gesture. And then a wolf came out of the trees and sat beside me, and another one came, and I thought, well, perhaps I'll stay for a while and see what this is. Here, my territory. 7 years empty, and something had told her here. My wolf was no longer merely awake. It was standing. Not straining, there was nothing frantic in it, nothing desperate. Just standing fully with the particular attention of an animal that has been patient for a very long time and has now, at last, found the thing it was patient for. I breathed carefully. Sen, I said. She looked at me. I need to tell you something, I said, and I want to be straightforward with you about it because I think you're a person who prefers that. I do, she said. The wolves haven't been here for 7 years. This territory has been silent for 7 years, and my council has been telling me for 7 years that it means the land has no true bond. I held her gaze. The wolves came back with you. 16 of them rode with us from the ridge. My household wolves, who haven't stirred normally since the year the pack left, came out to meet them, and something in me that has been still for 7 years is not still anymore. I paused. I don't think that's coincidence. She was very still. The fire crackled. The young wolf in her lap shifted and sighed without waking. No, she said at last, quietly, I don't think it is either. I am not. I stopped and started again. I am telling you this because you should know what I believe is happening, not to put any pressure on you. You said you'll stay to see what this is. That's enough. You don't owe me anything and I won't pretend you do. She looked at me for a long time. I had the sense of being assessed, not judged, not measured against some expectation, but genuinely seen. Assessed the way the land assesses a person, without any interest in what you want to be, only in what you are. I've been walking for years, she said, and I have been honest with myself the whole time that I didn't know where I was going, but I also knew, she paused, as though looking for the right word. I knew I was going towards something. The direction was always real, even when the destination wasn't. She looked at the fire. When I came over the Iraval Ridge and felt here, it was the clearest that direction has ever been. I said nothing. I waited. I'll stay, she said, not to fulfill anything or prove anything. I'll stay because the wolves are here and the land feels right, and a pause, the smallest, most careful pause, and because I'd like to see what this is too. I let out a breath I had not been aware I was holding. The fire burned. The wolves slept. We sat on opposite sides of the hearth and talked until the candles burned low, and at no point did either of us reach for what the other had half named. We were both, I think, people who respected the weight of things and did not want to rush them. But the compass in my chest was pointing true north, and had not wavered since the moment I'd found her in the clearing. The council meeting happened on the 6th morning. I had not planned it to be the way it was. I had intended to introduce Sen quietly, as a visitor, as someone whose presence in the Northern Territory warranted study, and manage the room carefully, the way I managed all political rooms. I was good at it. 7 years of holding a fractious council together while they pressed me to resolve a bond crisis had made me precise and controlled in such settings. What I had not accounted for was Lord Cassiver. Cassiver had been on my council for 11 years. He was a capable administrator and a profound political irritant, with the particular quality of a man who has always believed his own judgment more reliable than the evidence before him. He had been one of the loudest voices for succession. He had, on 2 separate occasions, suggested specific candidates for a new mate bond. He was, in short, someone who had a great deal invested in a particular resolution to the 7-year problem, and the arrival of an unregistered wanderer from the northern ridge was not that resolution. He waited until I had finished my introduction of Sen, who stood at the end of the council table with her hands easy at her sides, watching the assembled lords with the same steady patience she brought to everything. And then he said, with the careful tone of a man who wants to sound measured while being incendiary, "My king, with respect, the northern wolves returning to a territory is not evidence of a bond. Animals move in response to conditions. That they followed this woman from the ridge is notable, but notable is not destined. We have no bloodline record for her, no pack attestation, no registered name in any border log from the last decade. We are asked to believe that a woman of no documented history or lineage is the answer to 7 years of territorial silence, on the strength of wolves following her." The room was quiet. I looked at Cassiver. I looked at the other lords, several of whom were wearing variations of his expression. Men who had been managing this problem for 7 years and had their own theories about its solution, and found this one inconveniently simple. I did not answer. Sen did. "You're right," she said. She said it without heat, without defense. Cassiver blinked. "Wolves following me isn't evidence of a bond. It's evidence that the wolves trust me, which is a different thing. The bond is," she paused, as though choosing her words with care. "The bond is between the king and the land. The wolves are how the land shows it. What you're actually asking is whether I'm the right person for the king, and that's not a question any of you can answer, and neither can I. The only answer to that is whether the bond rises." She looked at Cassiver without any particular challenge. "Which is true regardless of whether I have a registered bloodline." The room was very quiet. Cassiver collected himself. "And if the bond does not rise?" "Then I'll leave," she said simply. "I'm not here to claim anything. I'm here because the wolves led me here and the king asked me to come, and I thought it was worth finding out what that means." She said it the way she said everything, without performance, without flinching, without the careful political calculation of someone trying to win a room. She simply said the true thing and let it sit. I watched 3 of my lords shift in their chairs, with the expression of people who have just encountered something they had not expected, and are not entirely sure what to do with it. Cassiver was not finished. He turned to me with the expression of a man playing what he considered his strongest card. "My king, the woman has no name in our records, no bloodline we can attest to, no." "Lord Cassiver," I said. He stopped. "You have in the past 7 years brought me 4 candidates for a new mate bond, all of them registered, all of them attested, all of them from bloodlines we could document in detail." I looked at him. "The territory is still empty, or it was," I paused, "until 6 days ago." He had nothing to say to that. "This meeting is adjourned," I said. "We'll reconvene when there's something concrete to report." She found me on the keep's north wall that evening. which told me that she had known where I would go when I needed to think, which told me something about how carefully she had already learned this place. "That was harder than you expected," she said, not a question. "Cassiver is persistent," I said. "He's afraid," she said. 7 years is a long time to manage something with no resolution. People build their whole working identity around managing a problem. When the problem might be resolved, they don't always feel relieved. She looked out at the northern grounds, where wolves were moving in the distance, visible in the moonlight. My father's pack had someone like that. When he was dying and the bonds were starting to break, there was a man who had built his whole sense of importance around holding the pack through the crisis. When my father made peace with it and started letting go gracefully, the man became furious. He needed the crisis to know who he was. I looked at her. "You were very young when your father died." 17, she said, "old enough to understand what was happening. Young enough that it broke a great deal in me that I didn't know was breakable." We stood quietly for a while. The wind came off the northern grounds cold and steady, and she did not move away from it, just turned her face into it a little, the way someone accepts the honest cold. "Sen," I said. "Yes." When Cassiver asked about bloodlines, I stopped. "Is there something I should know, something you haven't told me?" She was quiet for a moment. Not evasive, I was beginning to understand the difference with her between the quiet of avoidance and the quiet of honest consideration. "My mother was from the Havard territory," she said. "My father's pack was small border county, nothing that would be in Valdenmark records. My mother," another pause. "She used to tell me that her grandmother had been a registered Valdenmark wolf keeper, one of the old ones before the border reorganization." She looked at me. "I don't know if it's true. My mother told stories. Some of them were true, and some of them were the kind of truth that is more important than fact." A small pause. "But when I came over the ridge and felt here, I thought of her. I thought of her grandmother." I looked at her for a long time. The moonlight was very clear. "The old wolf keepers," I said slowly, "before the border reorganization. They weren't registered as bloodline in the modern sense. They were bonded to the territory itself. It was a different kind of record." She looked at me. "There is an archive," I said, "in the lower keep." "I haven't looked at it I thought about it. I haven't looked at it actually. My father showed it to me once, the old bond records before the reorganization." "Oh," she said quietly. "I'll look," I said, "tomorrow." She nodded. She did not press. She turned back to the northern grounds and watched the wolves moving in the moonlight, and I stood beside her, and neither of us said anything for a long time, and it was easy, in a way that things are only easy when they are right. The archive was in the lower keep, in a room that smelled of old stone and older paper, lit by small windows that let in gray winter light. I brought the archivist and sent him away again when I found what I was looking for, because some things you read alone. The old bond records were organized by territory and by family name, and the handwriting was archaic enough that it took me longer than I wanted to admit to work through it. But the Havard border territory was there, in the 3rd volume of the Eastern Records, and the name was there. Valsine of the Havard boundary, bonded to the northern wolf grounds in the 3rd year of the Valdenmark consolidation. Her line held to the territory as keeper so long as the line persists, and the bond is called Valsine, a name that was, in the way of old names, the compressed form of 2 older words. The words for valley and sen. I sat in the archive for a long time. My wolf was standing very still in my chest, not with the stillness of absence, the empty quiet of 7 years. With the stillness of an animal that has found the end of a long trail and is taking one last breath before it steps forward. I understood, sitting in that cold archive room with the old record open on the table before me, that the wolves had not come back to Valdenmark because of anything I had done or failed to do. They had come back because the line had been called. Because the bonded blood had returned to the territory it was pledged to. because the land had recognized, before any of us had thought to ask, the woman it had been waiting for. She had told me she'd walked north for years and felt the direction was real even when the destination wasn't. The destination had been written into the bond record before either of us was born. I told her that afternoon. I brought the record to her in the great hall. She was by the east fireplace again, with the wolves, which seemed to be where she went when she wanted to think, and set the book open on the table beside her and waited while she read it. She read it twice. Then she sat back in her chair and looked at the fire for a long time. Valsine, she said. My mother called her grandmother Valse. She said it was a family nickname. A pause. She told me the story as a fairy tale. A woman bonded to a wolf territory, her line pledged to it forever. I thought it was, she stopped. A story people tell children about belonging, to make them feel they come from somewhere. It was that, I said, and it was also true. She looked at me. Her eyes were very bright, the way eyes are after a long time of containing something that has nowhere else to go. She did not cry. She was not, I thought, someone who cried easily, not from hardness, but from the practice of being alone for a long time, which teaches you to hold things internally until they find their own resolution. Years, she said quietly. I walked for years, and the whole time I was just going home. There was nothing useful I could say to that. So I said nothing, and sat across the fire from her, and let the fact of it settle in the room between us the way the archive record settled on the table, heavy with time, real beyond argument. After a while she said, "What happens now?" "The council should know," I said. "The bond record changes the legal standing of your presence here significantly. Cassiver will have nothing to argue against." "I don't mean politically," she said. I looked at her. "I know what happens politically," she said, with the gentlest hint of dry understanding. "You introduce the record, the council acknowledges the bloodline bond to the territory, Cassiver objects and is overruled. That part I can anticipate." She looked at me steadily. "I mean, what happens with us?" I held her gaze. I had been careful, since the fireside evening on the fourth day, not to press anything, not to reach for what was half-named. I had told her what I believed was happening and left it where she left it. Something to be seen, something to take time with, something that did not need to be forced into language before it was ready. But she was asking me directly, and she was a person who preferred directness, and I was a king who had waited 7 years and would not now pretend to be unsure of what I felt. "I would like to court you," I said. "Formally, by Valdenmark custom, which is slow and unhurried and gives you every right to say no at any point. I would like to give you time to know this place and these people, and time for this to be real to you on your own terms, not because an old record says it should be, but because you choose it." I paused. "The bond in me is clear. It has been clear since the clearing. But a bond is not a claim, and it never has been. You walked here for years on your own, and I will not treat that journey as having delivered you to me like something I was owed." She was quiet for a long time. "That," she said, "is possibly the most careful thing anyone has ever said to me." I meant it carefully. "I know." She looked at the fire and then back at me. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." The formal council meeting 2 days later was, as she had predicted, politically straightforward, though Cassiver's silence when I presented the archive record was a particular kind of loud. The other lords read the record, asked the archivist to verify the lineage link, and received his confirmation. The legal standing was unambiguous. Sen was of the bonded Havard line, her bloodline pledged to the northern Valdenmark territory in the consolidation records, the pledge still active under territorial law. Lord Varin, older than Cassiver, quieter, a man whose opinion carried weight with the northern houses, looked up from the record and said, "The wolves came back the day she entered the territory." "They did," I said. He looked at Sen. "Did you know when you came over the ridge?" "No," she said. I knew the direction felt right. I didn't know why until the king found the record. He nodded slowly, with the expression of a man who has lived long enough to recognize when something is true regardless of whether it is convenient. 7 years is a long wait, he said. I'm glad the territory remembers. Cassiver said nothing at all, which was its own kind of acknowledgement. What followed was what I had promised her: time, unhurried, unforced. She learned Snowfall Keep and the southern hold of Valdenmark the way she had learned the northern territory, by moving through it at her own pace, noticing things, asking questions when she had them and not asking them when she didn't. The staff, who had been collectively baffled by her in the first week, arrived by the 3rd week at a state of collective quiet affection that they expressed by leaving extra wood by her fireplace without being asked, and sending the best bread from the morning batch to the East Wing. She was good with people, not in the performed way of those who have been taught to manage them, but in the true way of someone who is genuinely interested in other human beings. She remembered things people told her. She noticed when someone was having a difficult day and found a way to be useful without making a point of it. The keeper of the grounds, who had initially been suspicious of an unregistered wanderer with no documented past, came to me in the 4th week and told me, with the gruff embarrassment of a man expressing a sentiment he was not fully comfortable with, that the East Wing woman was sensible. Coming from him, it was high praise. The wolves settled fully into the territory and the keep, and more came. By midwinter, the northern grounds had a pack of 34, not the full number from before the 7-year silence, but more than enough to feel like return rather than remnant. My wolf had risen completely, was present in my chest the way it had been in my father's time, alert and certain. On mornings when Sen walked the outer grounds with the wolves, I could feel the direction of her through the bond the way you feel the sun through closed eyes, warm, unmistakable, real. I courted her slowly, evenings by the fire. Rides through the northern territory, where she would point out things I had stopped noticing. The way the ice had shifted on the Iravel River, the place where a new den had been established, the specific clearing where she had been sitting when I first found her, which now had the look of a place the wolves returned to. I gave her a Valdenmark winter cloak in the keep's deep blue, because her dark coat was not heavy enough, and she refused to mention being cold, which was exactly the kind of stubbornness I had come to find both exasperating and profoundly dear. She wore it without ceremony, which was also exactly right. We did not rush the mark. I had felt the pull of it since the 6th day, a heat at my wrist that I recognized and held carefully, the way you hold something you do not want to startle. She felt it too. She had told me so, matter-of-factly, sometime in the 5th week, in the middle of a conversation about the archive records, as though it were simply one more true thing to name. "I feel the mark pulling," she said. "I thought you should know." And then she had continued reading the record she'd been working through, and I had sat across the table from her, and looked at the crown of her head bent over the page, and felt something so full and quiet in my chest that I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. The mark rose on a night in the deep of winter, 3 months after I had found her in the clearing. Not in ceremony, not in the great hall, on the north wall of the keep, where she had found me the evening of the council meeting, where we had stood together and watched the wolves in the moonlight. We were standing there again. I could not have said whose idea it was, only that we had both ended up there at the same hour, which was not, by that point, a coincidence either of us found remarkable. When the heat at my wrist became more than a pull, became a certainty, became light. Her wrist rose at the same moment. She looked at it then at me with an expression that was not surprise, not quite. The expression of someone seeing confirmed what they had already known. The same quality she had brought to everything, that steady, honest presence, turned now on this. The wolves below the wall went still, every one of them at once, as though a hand had been placed gently on them. And then in the moonlight they bowed, not with the formal submission of a subordinate wolf to an alpha, but with the deep bow of recognition, the bow that says, yes, this is right, this is the thing we knew. 34 wolves, bowing to Sen of the Havard line, on the north wall of Snowfall Keep in the deep of a Valdenmark winter. She looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked at me, and the steadiness in her eyes was there and warm and full of something that did not need a name, because it was already the truest thing in the room. Here, she said softly, the word she had felt at the ridge. The word for the end of 7 years of walking in a true direction toward an unnamed destination. It was always here. Yes, I said. I took her hand. The mark glowed at both our wrists, equal and mutual, the old Havard bond and the Valdenmark kingship completed in each other. Below us, the wolves began to move again, not away simply to settle, to lie down in the moonlit yard with the ease of animals who have been a long time from home and are now, at last, returned. We held the formal recognition in the great hall 1 week later, not a ceremony I imposed, but one the council and the northern lords requested, which was a different thing and mattered. The hall was full. The lords from the eastern houses, the southern keeps, the border territories. Cassiver was present, in the front row, with the expression of a man who has revised a long-held position, and is not entirely comfortable with how right the revision looks in retrospect. Sen stood beside me in the deep blue Valdenmark cloak, no elaborate dress, no performance, no attempt to be anything other than exactly what she was, and I presented the archive record and spoke the formal claim in the old territorial language, the words that had not been spoken in Valdenmark in 7 years. The king bond to a territory-bonded mate, the joining of the pledged line to the keep. Lord Varin was the first to bow. He did it slowly and deliberately, the bow of a man who means it, and then the room followed, not in the rushed, automatic way of protocol, but in the way of people who have watched something unfold over 3 months and have arrived at their own conclusions. Even Cassiver bowed. He did it last, and he did it briefly, and with the precise minimum of grace required, but he did it. Sen accepted it with the same steadiness she brought to everything. She did not look triumphant. She did not look vindicated. She looked like a woman standing in the place she was always going, finally arrived. The wolves were in the hall. Of course they were. They had been in every space she occupied since the clearing, and they were not going to absent themselves from this one. The oldest male, the great gray wolf who had been the first to appear in the Northern Territory, who had sat beside her at the Iravel Ridge on the day. She stopped, walked forward when the room bowed and sat at her feet, and put his head against her knee, and closed his eyes. The hall was very quiet. We rebuilt the bond records that winter, Sen and I and the archivist, working our way through the old Havard volumes and the early territorial logs, reconstructing the pledged lineages that had been lost or undocumented in the consolidation. She was methodical and patient at it, more patient than I was, with the archivist's dry humor and the difficulty of the archaic handwriting and the cold of the lower keep in winter. She taught me what she had learned in 6 weeks in the empty Northern Territory, what the wolves were doing when they moved at that particular hour, why the ice was thinner in the specific place she had shown me, what the silence of a territory said about its health, and what different kinds of quiet it had. She had spent those 6 weeks, she told me, not just traveling with the wolves but listening to the land, the way her mother had taught her without calling it anything in particular. Just listen, Sen. The ground tells you things if you stop making noise long enough to hear it. I told her about my father, and the morning he had brought me here as a boy to stand with the pack, and the stone-dropping in still water certainty that had settled in me then. I told her about the 7 years and the bond dissolution, and the particular quality of stubbornness that had kept me from choosing another. She listened to all of it without rushing me, without offering resolution before I was finished, without making it into anything other than what it was. She was, among all her other qualities, the rarest kind of listener, one who lets a thing be what it is. Spring came slowly to Valdenmark, the way it always did, grudgingly, then all at once. The Northern Territory, when we rode out to it in the first warmth, had a pack of 41, and the Iravel River had thawed and was running clear, and the clearing past the ridge where I had first found Sen was full of new wolf dens, the pups visible at the den mouths in the pale morning light. She looked out at it from the same fallen pine she had been sitting on when I had found her, and said nothing for a long time. 7 years, I said beside her. She was watching the pups. The great gray wolf was lying at the base of the pine, his chin on his paws, his eyes half closed in the thin spring sun. It doesn't feel like 7 years lost. It feels like, she considered, 7 years that the territory was keeping itself for this. I looked at her. The spring light on her face, the steadiness of her, the quality of her that the archive record had given a name to, but that the name had never been the whole of. She had always been more than any single record could contain. She had walked toward this for years on her own judgment and her own trueness, with no document to tell her the direction was real, and she had not stopped. The territory kept itself, I said. You kept yourself. She looked at me then and smiled, a real one, unhurried, the kind that arrives when you have stopped trying to manage anything and have just let yourself be where you are. We kept ourselves, she said, for each other. I had no argument with that. I did not try to make one. The pups tumbled over each other at the den mouth in the thin spring sun. 34 adult wolves, 41 now, with the new births and more to come, moved through the Northern Territory of Valdenmark with the ease of animals who had been a long time away and were in no hurry now that they were home. The land was alive again, and the bond was real, and the direction that had been true for 7 years was not a direction anymore. It was simply where we were.